The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the Caldwell estate, turning the marble floors into pools of gold and silence. For years that house had known only the quiet hum of machines and the clipped heels of servants, never laughter, never the sound of a child's joy. Ethan Caldwell, a billionaire whose name carried weight on Wall Street and fear in boardrooms, stood by the window of his study staring at a calendar filled with meetings that meant everything to everyone but him. In another room, his 7-year-old son Daniel sat alone at the breakfast table, drawing circles in a bowl of oatmeal gone cold. The boy rarely spoke. Since his mother's passing 2 years earlier, he had become a shadow moving through a house built for noise. When the doorbell rang that morning, it startled the silence more than it startled the man. The housekeeper rushed to open it, and standing on the threshold was a young woman with skin the color of warm earth and eyes that held a quiet strength. She was dressed simply, her hair tied neatly, her hands folded around a small suitcase. "Good morning, sir," she said softly when Ethan appeared behind the housekeeper. "My name is Amara. The agency said you were looking for someone to care for your son." Ethan's brow tightened. He had forgotten about the interview. He glanced at his watch, then at the stranger in his doorway. "You are the new nanny?" he asked. She nodded. "If you will have me, sir." Her voice carried no fear, only calm conviction. Behind him, Daniel peeked from the hallway, his small face half hidden behind the doorframe. Their eyes met, one curious, one cautious. Something flickered between them, small but unmistakable. "Daniel," Ethan called, surprised to see his son watching. The boy did not reply. Amara crouched slightly, her smile gentle. "Hello, Daniel," she said, as if she had known him all her life. "I am here to help your dad keep the plants alive and make sure someone reminds you to eat your pancakes before they get cold." The boy blinked, then a sound escaped him, a tiny laugh, unsure but real. Ethan froze. It had been more than a year since he had heard that sound. Amara looked up at him, still smiling, as though laughter was the simplest miracle in the world. It was the first time the mansion heard laughter in years, the cook would whisper later. But in that moment, Ethan only stood there, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. The ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause, holding its breath, as if even time itself understood that something had just changed. Outside, a breeze moved through the open doorway, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and the faint sound of children playing somewhere beyond the gates. Inside, for the first time in years, the air no longer felt empty. The following morning arrived with a pale mist resting over the Caldwell estate. The marble floors gleamed as always, but something unseen had shifted. The air no longer carried the same hollow stillness. Ethan noticed it when he stepped into the kitchen and saw Amara pouring juice into a small glass while Daniel sat at the counter watching her intently. The boy's spoon rested beside his bowl, forgotten, yet his eyes were alive with quiet curiosity. Amara noticed Ethan's reflection in the polished refrigerator door and greeted him with a polite nod. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she said softly. "Daniel wanted to help me make breakfast." Ethan crossed his arms, unsure whether to approve or retreat. "He does not usually come in here," he muttered. "He said he wanted to see how pancakes were made," she replied, smiling faintly. "So I told him the secret is patience and the right amount of butter." Daniel giggled, a sound so light that Ethan almost did not recognize it. The man's stern expression softened for a brief second before he turned toward his coffee machine, as if hiding from his own reaction. While Amara flipped a pancake, Daniel leaned forward and whispered, "Can I try?" She handed him the spatula without hesitation. "Just be gentle. Let the heat do the work." Ethan glanced over his shoulder, ready to intervene, but stopped when he saw the way she guided the boy's hands, steady, careful, trusting. The pancake landed perfectly on the plate. Daniel grinned with pride. "You did it," Amara said warmly. "Looks like we have a chef in the house." The boy's smile lingered even as he turned shyly away. Ethan's heart, so used to the rhythm of profit and performance, found itself stumbling for a reason he could not name. He cleared his throat. "Daniel, finish your breakfast. We need to leave in 20 minutes. "Yes, sir," the boy murmured, but his eyes still flicked toward Amara. She caught Ethan's gaze and held it for a moment, not with challenge but quiet understanding. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Later that day, Ethan sat in his study overlooking the vast garden. From the open window, He could hear laughter drifting from the backyard. He rose from his chair, drawn by the sound, and stepped out onto the terrace. Below, Daniel was running through the grass, chasing bubbles that shimmered like tiny rainbows. Amara knelt nearby with a small plastic wand, laughing softly each time the bubbles escaped his grasp. The scene was so ordinary, so human, that it felt foreign within the boundaries of his estate. His assistant, Mark, approached from behind holding a folder. "Sir, the Tokyo investors are requesting an early meeting," Mark said. Ethan did not answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the lawn. "Sir?" Mark repeated. Ethan blinked. "Tell them to wait," he said quietly. Mark hesitated, startled. "Wait, sir?" "Yes," Ethan said, his tone final. "I will call them later." It was the first time in years he had delayed business for anything that was not life or death. That evening, when Amara finished tidying Daniel's room, she found Ethan waiting in the hallway. "You seem to have a talent for keeping him occupied," he said. She wiped her hands on her apron, unsure whether it was a compliment or an accusation. "He just needs someone to listen, Mr. Caldwell. Children speak even when they do not use words." His expression hardened again. "I have given him everything money can buy." She met his eyes without fear. "Yes, sir, but not everything that love can build." For a long moment, silence filled the corridor. Then Ethan turned away abruptly. "Good night, Miss Amara." "Good night, sir," she replied softly. That night, Daniel dreamed for the first time in months. He dreamed of laughter and pancakes and sunlight through bubbles. The next morning, as Ethan prepared to leave for the office, he found a small drawing on the kitchen counter. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a giant yellow sundae. Above it, in shaky letters, Daniel had written, "Dad, me, and Amara." Ethan stared at the picture for a long time. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. The housekeeper entered quietly and paused when she saw it. "It has been a long time since he drew anything," she said. Ethan did not answer. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. As he drove through the iron gates later that morning, he caught a glimpse of Amara standing by the front door, waving goodbye with Daniel beside her. The boy's smile was wide, unguarded, and full of life. For a fleeting second, Ethan felt something unfamiliar bloom inside his chest. It was not pride or relief. It was gratitude, raw and quiet. For the first time, he realized that perhaps the walls he had built around his heart were not keeping the world out, they were keeping him locked in. And somewhere between the morning light and that small wave goodbye, Ethan Caldwell understood that the silence which had once defined his home was beginning to lose its power. The next week brought a rhythm the Caldwell house had never known. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen as the smell of toast and syrup replaced the sterile scent of coffee and paperwork. Ethan still woke early, still read the financial reports before sunrise, but he lingered longer now by the window, listening for laughter. Every morning, without fail, it came. Amara had turned breakfast into a small adventure. She would ask Daniel to guess shapes in the pancake batter or count bubbles in the glass of orange juice. His voice, once hesitant, now filled the air like a fragile melody relearning its tune. Ethan pretended not to notice, though he found himself timing his steps through the hallway to catch a glimpse of them. One morning, as he entered the kitchen, Daniel was sitting at the counter with a sketch pad. Amara stood beside him, brushing crumbs from his hair. "Look, Dad," Daniel said, holding up the drawing. It was a lopsided picture of a garden with flowers that reached the sky. "Amara said we could make one like this in the backyard." Ethan looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "A garden?" She smiled, wiping her hands on a towel. "Yes, sir. He wants to plant sunflowers. He said the yard feels too quiet." "It is not exactly a playground," Ethan said. "It is acres of trimmed grass." "Then maybe it is time to let something grow there," she replied softly. The words struck deeper than he expected. He agreed without another word. That afternoon, the estate transformed. The gardener, puzzled but obedient, brought shovels and seed packets. Amara knelt beside Daniel in the dirt, showing him how to press his thumb gently into the soil, how to pour just enough water to make it come alive. Ethan watched from the terrace, sleeves rolled up, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. The sound of Daniel's laughter echoed through the hedges, mingling with the rustle of wind. It was strange and wonderful all at once. When the first patch of soil was ready, Daniel looked up and said, "Dad, can you help?" The request froze Ethan where he stood. For 2 years, the boy had barely spoken more than a sentence to him. Now those 4 small words cracked something open. Ethan walked down the steps, awkward at first, unsure how to kneel on grass in an Armani suit. Amara tried to hide her smile. "Here," she said, handing him a trowel. "The ground does not care how expensive your shoes are." He crouched beside his son, feeling the sun warm his shoulders. Together, they planted the first sunflower seed. It was a small gesture, but it felt enormous. Later that evening, as the sky turned amber, Ethan found Amara in the kitchen washing the dirt from her hands. "You seem to have a way with him," he said quietly. "It is not me," she answered. "It is the way you looked at him when you helped. Children notice things like that." He frowned slightly. "I did not do much. Sometimes not much is everything," she said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes held a kind of truth that lingered long after she left the room. That night, Ethan sat in his study surrounded by silence that no longer felt comforting. He picked up the folded drawing Daniel had made, the one he carried in his pocket. For years, he had measured success by balance sheets and stock value. But in that moment, he realized his greatest investment might be something that could not be counted at all. The next morning, Daniel woke early and ran to the backyard to check on the soil. "Nothing yet," he said, frowning. Amara crouched beside him, her hands still holding a mug of cocoa. "Good things take time, Daniel. Even flowers have to believe in the sun before they see it." He nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think Mom liked flowers?" he asked. Her voice softened. "I think she loved them, and I think she would be very proud of how gentle you are with them." Ethan stood by the window, unseen, his throat tightening at the sound of his son's question. That night, before bed, Daniel left a small pot of dirt on the windowsill in his room. Beneath it, he placed a folded note that read, "For Mom." When Ethan saw it later, he said nothing. He simply placed his hand on the doorframe and whispered, "She would have loved that." The housekeeper, who had watched the family for years, told the cook the next morning that the Caldwells were changing. "The boy smiles now," she said, "and the master listens when he used to command." The cook nodded. "It must be that new nanny," she replied. "No," the housekeeper said after a pause. "It is the way she made them remember they still have hearts." Outside, the first sunflower sprouted a thin green stem reaching for light. Inside, Ethan stood in the doorway of Daniel's room, watching his son sleep with the faintest smile on his lips. And though he did not say it aloud, he knew the truth. Healing had begun, quietly, like the first flower pushing through the soil after a long winter. Days passed, and the Caldwell estate began to hum with a new rhythm. The gardener watered the patch of soil that Daniel and Amara had planted, and small green shoots began to rise like hopeful whispers against the gray stone walls. Every morning, Daniel would rush outside to check the progress, his small hands brushing over the fragile stems with reverence. Ethan often watched from the balcony, pretending to read his phone, though his eyes followed every move his son made. The housekeeper noticed, but she said nothing. One afternoon, a storm rolled in from the west, darkening the sky. The air grew heavy, and thunder rumbled across the hills. Amara stood by the window, watching the wind whip through the trees. Daniel tugged at her sleeve. "Will the flowers be okay?" he asked, worry in his eyes. She knelt beside him. "They are stronger than they look," she said. "Sometimes storms help things grow." He frowned, not fully convinced, but he nodded. That evening, Ethan returned home later than usual. The board meeting had stretched for hours, full of arguments and deadlines that no longer stirred his pulse the way they once did. When he stepped inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon. From the dining room came soft laughter. He followed the sound and paused at the doorway. Daniel and Amara were sitting at the table, a small candle flickering between them. She had baked a pie, uneven and rustic, and Daniel was telling her about his favorite storybook. Ethan's voice broke the moment. "What is going on here?" he asked. Amara rose instantly. "We were just having a small treat, Mr. Caldwell." Daniel helped. "He should be in bed," Ethan said, though his tone lacked conviction. Daniel looked down at his plate, guilt flashing across his face. Amara placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He was worried about the storm," she explained. "We baked to distract him." Ethan exhaled, his irritation fading as quickly as it came. "Go on then, finish up," he said, loosening his tie. Amara smiled faintly, surprised by his concession. Later that night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Ethan found himself standing in the kitchen again. Amara was washing dishes, humming quietly to herself. "He likes you," Ethan said, his voice lower than usual. "He trusts you." She glanced over her shoulder. "He is easy to trust once you listen." "Listening is not exactly a skill I have," Ethan replied. She turned off the faucet and dried her hands. "Maybe it is not a skill," she said softly. "Maybe it is a choice." Her words lingered in the quiet kitchen. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside had softened into rain, tapping gently against the windows like a lullaby. Ethan's gaze fell on her wrist where a thin silver bracelet caught the light. It was old and slightly tarnished, but it shimmered as if it carried a story. "That bracelet," he said suddenly. "Where did you get it?" She hesitated. "It was my mother's," she answered. She always said it reminded her that kindness has a way of finding its way back. "Your mother sounds wise," Ethan said, his tone thoughtful. "She was," Amara replied. "She used to work as a nurse at Street Mercy Hospital downtown." Ethan froze, his mind catching on the name. It was the same hospital where his wife had been taken after the car accident years ago. He did not speak, but his pulse quickened. "What was her name?" he asked quietly. "Evelyn James," Amara said. "Why?" Ethan shook his head slightly. "No reason. I just thought it sounded familiar." But the name echoed in his memory long after she left the room. Later, in his study, Ethan opened an old file from the drawer where he kept documents from the accident. Among them was a handwritten note from a nurse who had stayed by his wife's side that night. Her name, signed neatly at the bottom, was Evelyn James. He sat back in his chair, the realization washing over him like the fading echo of thunder. Amara's mother had been the woman who had comforted his wife in her final moments. The bracelet, the calm strength, even the gentle way she spoke it all made sense now. The next morning, Ethan watched Amara from the window as she walked hand in hand with Daniel across the wet grass, their shoes leaving prints that filled with rainwater. She was laughing at something Daniel said, and for the first time, Ethan saw her not as an employee but as a bridge, one that somehow connected the life he had lost with the one he still had. The world outside the mansion's walls continued as usual, but within, something had changed. The storm had passed, and the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. The sun broke through the clouds just as Amara looked up toward the balcony. Their eyes met briefly, and she smiled before turning back to Daniel. Ethan remained still, his heart heavy, yet strangely light. He did not know what this connection meant or where it would lead, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The woman who had stepped into his home had brought more than laughter and warmth. She had brought pieces of a truth he did not know he needed to find. The morning after the storm, the Caldwell estate seemed brighter than it had in years. The sun poured through the wide windows, and the scent of damp earth mixed with the faint aroma of coffee and pancakes. Daniel rushed downstairs barefoot, eager to see the garden. "They made it," he shouted from the backyard, his voice carrying into the house. Ethan followed more slowly, a cup of black coffee warming his hand. He found Amara kneeling beside Daniel, inspecting the tiny green shoots that had survived the wind and rain. "You were right," Daniel said proudly. "The storm helped them grow." Amara smiled and brushed a streak of dirt from his cheek. "I told you, storms make strong roots." Ethan stood a few steps away, watching the quiet scene unfold. For the first time, he felt the heavy stillness of the estate had lifted completely. "Breakfast is ready, sir," the housekeeper called from the kitchen door. Ethan nodded but did not move. Amara noticed his gaze and stood, dusting her hands. "Would you like to join us outside?" she asked politely. "The air is fresh today." Ethan hesitated, then set his cup on the patio table. "Why not?" he said. They ate together on the stone terrace, sunlight catching on the silver bracelet around Amara's wrist. Daniel chattered between bites of toast, his laughter bubbling freely. When he ran off to chase a butterfly, Ethan finally spoke. "Your mother," he said quietly. "Evelyn James. She worked at St. Mercy Hospital, did she not?" Amara looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Yes, she did. How did you know?" Ethan took a slow breath. "My wife was there after the accident. She did not survive. But I remember one nurse who stayed with her that night. She wrote a letter afterward. Your mother signed her name at the bottom." Amara's hand went still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the wind filled the space between them. "She told me about that night," Amara said softly. "She said there was a man who would not leave the waiting room. She said his pain broke her heart." Ethan's eyes drifted toward the horizon. "I did not even know how to say goodbye," he murmured. "Your mother was the last person who spoke to her. I owe her a debt I can never repay." Amara's voice was gentle but steady. "She would have said you already have. She believed that kindness has a way of finding its way home." The words settled over him like sunlight after a long shadow. For the rest of the day, Ethan could not shake the feeling that something larger than coincidence had brought Amara into their lives. That evening, as the sun dipped low, he called Daniel to the living room. "Come here, son," he said. "We are going to take a drive." Daniel looked up from his toy cars, puzzled. "Where to?" "Somewhere important." Amara helped Daniel with his jacket before they stepped into the sleek black car waiting in the driveway. The drive took them across the city to a quiet cemetery framed by oak trees and the faint sound of church bells. Ethan parked the car and turned to Amara. "You can stay here if you like," he said. But she shook her head. "No, I will come." They walked together to a marble headstone engraved with the name Grace Caldwell. Daniel knelt down and placed a single sunflower beside it. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. Ethan's throat tightened. "She would have loved those," he said. "She loved the color yellow." Amara stood a few steps behind, her hands clasped. After a long silence, Ethan turned to her. "Thank you for bringing him back here," he said. "I have not been able to do this alone." "You were never alone," she said softly. "You just needed to remember." On the drive back, the car was quiet, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Daniel leaned against his father's shoulder, his small hand resting in Ethan's larger one. Amara glanced at them from the passenger seat, her heart swelling at the sight. When they reached home, Daniel ran inside to tell the housekeeper about the visit. Ethan and Amara remained near the car for a moment. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of wet grass and pine. "I do not know what to say," Ethan began. "You do not have to," Amara replied. "Sometimes silence says more than words." He nodded, then looked at her directly. "Stay," he said simply. "I mean as part of this family, not just as an employee. Daniel needs you. And maybe I do too." She blinked, caught off guard. "Mr. Caldwell, I am honored, but—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "Call me Ethan." The name felt strange and tender on her lips when she finally spoke it. "All right, Ethan," she said, a small smile touching her face. In that moment, as the last light of day faded behind them, there was no billionaire or nanny, no hierarchy of wealth or power. There was only a man learning to be human again, a boy rediscovering laughter, and a young woman whose presence had stitched the broken edges of their hearts together. When Daniel peeked from the window and saw them standing side by side, he waved happily, his voice carrying through the night. "Dad, look, the stars are out." Ethan looked up, and for the first time in years, he realized how beautiful they truly were. The darkness no longer felt endless. It felt like a promise that healing, once begun, would only grow brighter. The next morning began with a rare calm that settled over the Caldwell home like a soft blanket. The light was golden and gentle, the kind that slipped through curtains and warmed even the coldest corners. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway watching Amara pour milk into Daniel's cereal bowl. The boy was talking quickly, his spoon waving in the air as he told her a story about the garden and how he was sure the flowers could hear him when he sang. Ethan smiled without realizing it. When Amara noticed him, she greeted him with a nod. "Good morning, Ethan," she said warmly. "Good morning," he replied. "What are you two plotting so early?" "We are planning a picnic in the garden," Daniel said proudly. "Amara says we can have sandwiches under the big oak tree." "That sounds perfect," Ethan said, pretending to check his watch. "Can I come, or is it just for gardeners and singers?" Daniel laughed. You can come, but you have to bring the cookies. Amara laughed too, and for a moment, the room was filled with the sound of family. The picnic that afternoon was simple but perfect. A checkered blanket spread across the grass, a basket filled with sandwiches, apples, and chocolate chip cookies that Daniel insisted on choosing himself. The sun hung high above the yard, glinting off the silver bracelet on Amara's wrist. Daniel ran back and forth between the blanket and the rows of sunflowers, which now stood tall and proud. He had started naming them one by one, and Ethan pretended to take notes when the boy pointed each one out. This one is Sunshine, Daniel said, and that one is Braveheart. Why Braveheart? Ethan asked. Because it grew even when the storm broke its stem, Daniel explained. Amara's eyes softened. That is a beautiful name, she said. You see things others do not. Ethan looked at his son with quiet pride. For the first time, he could see traces of his late wife in the boy's compassion and curiosity. Later, as the afternoon breeze cooled, Amara collected the dishes while Ethan leaned back against the oak tree. He has changed, Ethan said softly. He laughs now. He talks about school again. I used to think he had forgotten how. Children do not forget, Amara replied. They wait. They wait for the world to feel safe enough to open their hearts again. Ethan studied her face. And you, Amara, what made you learn to do that? To make people feel safe? She smiled faintly. Maybe because I needed someone to do the same for me once. When my mother passed, I thought kindness had left the world. But I realized later it was still here. It just needed a place to be noticed. Ethan wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. He only nodded, feeling a weight he had carried for years begin to ease. As the sun began to dip, the air grew cooler. Daniel fell asleep on the blanket, his small hand curled around a toy car. Ethan watched him for a long moment. You should rest too, Amara said quietly. You look like you have not slept in days. I do not sleep much, Ethan admitted. The house feels too quiet when the lights go out. Then maybe it is not the house that is too quiet, she said gently. Maybe it is the heart that is waiting for company. Her words struck him in a way that was both comforting and painful. He looked at her, his expression softening. You remind me of my wife, he said, not because you look like her, but because you make the air feel alive again. Amara looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. She must have been an extraordinary woman. She was, Ethan said, and I think she would have liked you. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was peaceful, the kind that settled between two people who understood more through quiet than through words. A gentle wind passed through the garden, rustling the tall sunflowers that swayed like a chorus of yellow flames. Daniel stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about cookies, and both of them smiled. When the evening came and the first stars appeared, Ethan carried his son inside, the boy's head resting against his shoulder. Amara followed, turning off the porch light and closing the door behind them. In the living room, the fire crackled softly, painting the walls in shades of gold and amber. Daniel was already asleep on the couch, his toy car still in his hand. Ethan covered him with a blanket, then turned to Amara. Thank you, he said simply. For what? She asked. For this, he said, gesturing around them, for making this house feel like home again. She hesitated, her eyes shimmering with warmth. You and Daniel did that yourselves, she said. I just reminded you it was possible. He smiled, the kind of smile that came slowly but stayed. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of sunflowers through the open window. The house that had once been a museum of grief now felt alive with the sound of breathing, the echo of laughter, and the quiet heartbeat of something like hope. As Ethan turned off the last light before heading upstairs, he paused to look back at the couch where Daniel slept and the faint reflection of Amara's bracelet in the dim firelight. For the first time in years, he whispered good night to someone other than his own sorrow, and in that small, fragile moment, the healing that had begun took another quiet step forward. The following week began with soft rain that fell steadily over the Caldwell estate. The garden glistened with droplets, each sunflower bowing under the weight of the water, and Daniel pressed his small palms against the window pane, watching with fascination. The flowers are taking a shower, he said with a giggle. Amara smiled beside him, drying her hands on a towel. Yes, they are, and when the sun comes back, They will stand even taller. Ethan, standing behind them, sipped his coffee quietly. He had begun to spend his mornings near the kitchen more often now, drawn not by habit but by comfort. The house that once echoed with loneliness now pulsed with a quiet, steady rhythm. The sound of Daniel's laughter had become the background music to his days. As the rain eased into a drizzle, Amara suggested they take a walk. "A little rain never hurt anyone," she said, wrapping a light jacket around Daniel's shoulders. Ethan hesitated but eventually followed, holding an umbrella large enough for all three. The air was cool and smelled of wet soil. Daniel hopped over puddles, his laughter filling the gray morning. "Look, Dad," he shouted. "The flowers are dancing." Ethan looked where the boy pointed. The tall sunflowers swayed gently in the wind, their yellow heads nodding as if in greeting. For a brief moment, Ethan felt an ache in his chest, a mix of joy and nostalgia. Grace, his late wife, had loved sunflowers. They had lined their wedding aisle, tall and bright, like beacons of happiness. Amara noticed his distant look but said nothing. Instead, she handed Daniel a small pair of scissors. "Would you like to pick one for your mother's picture?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded eagerly and ran ahead. Ethan's throat tightened as he watched his son crouch beside the flowers. When Daniel returned, holding a perfect sunflower dripping with rain, he handed it to his father. "For Mom," he said simply. Ethan took it, his voice caught between pride and sorrow. She would have loved it. They returned inside with muddy shoes and wet hair, and the housekeeper scolded them half-heartedly while smiling behind her apron. Amara set the sunflower in a vase by Grace's photo in the living room. "There," she said. "Now she can see how strong they have grown." That evening, as Daniel worked on his drawing at the table, Ethan sat nearby reading a book. He could feel Amara's quiet presence as she moved between rooms, folding laundry, humming a tune. When Daniel finished, he ran to Ethan and held up the paper. "It is us," he said proudly. Ethan looked down. The drawing showed 3 figures again, just like before, but now there was something new. The flowers, tall and bright, surrounding the family like guardians. In the corner, written carefully in uneven letters, were the words, "Home with Love." Ethan felt his vision blur. "It is perfect," he whispered. Daniel beamed, climbing onto his lap. "Amara helped me spell the words," he said. "She says homes are made of love, not walls." Ethan looked up at her, and she met his gaze with quiet sincerity. "Your son is wise," she said softly. "He learns quickly. He has a good teacher," Ethan replied. Later that night, the sound of rain returned, tapping gently against the roof. Ethan walked past the guest room where Amara stayed and saw a faint light under the door. He hesitated before knocking lightly. She opened it, surprised. "Ethan," she said, "is everything all right?" "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for everything you have done, for Daniel, for me." Amara shook her head. "You do not need to thank me. I am grateful to be here. Sometimes we end up where we are needed most." Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe that is true." The next morning, the sun rose clear and bright. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and new. Daniel woke early and ran outside, his shoes untied, his laughter echoing across the yard. Amara followed, her dress fluttering in the breeze. Ethan joined them a few minutes later, carrying a tray of orange juice and toast. "You are going to spoil him," Amara teased. "I think that is my right as his father," Ethan replied with a rare grin. Daniel interrupted, holding something in his small hands. "Look," he said. "A butterfly." The delicate creature perched on his fingertip, its wings shimmering with sunlight. Amara crouched beside him, whispering, "It means change is coming." Daniel watched the butterfly lift into the sky, eyes wide with wonder. "Where is it going?" he asked. "Where it is needed next," she said. Ethan looked at them, his son, full of light, and the woman who had somehow stitched the broken pieces of his life together, and he realized that change had already come. That night, as Daniel slept peacefully in his room, Ethan walked through the quiet halls, pausing at the window that overlooked the garden. The moonlight washed over the sunflowers, their golden faces turned upward even in the dark. For the first time since Grace's death, Ethan whispered into the night, "Thank you." He did not know whether he was speaking to his late wife, to fate, or to the quiet woman asleep down the hall. But deep inside, he knew it was all the same, because kindness, once planted, had a way of growing roots that never died. The following morning dawned clear and bright. The sky brushed with strokes of pink and gold. The scent of dew and fresh earth filled the air as the first rays of sunlight stretched over the Caldwell estate. Amara stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching Daniel chase a butterfly across the yard. His laughter drifted through the open door like music, light and pure. Ethan entered quietly, his steps softer these days, his presence less imposing. "He wakes up with the sun now," he said with a faint smile. "He used to hide under the covers until noon." Amara glanced at him. Children rise easily when they have something to look forward to. Ethan nodded, thoughtful. "I suppose he does." His eyes followed Daniel's small figure darting between the flowers that had grown tall and golden. The sunflowers had become more than a garden project. They had become a symbol of everything that was healing, bright, strong, unyielding. Later that afternoon, Amara decided to tend the garden while Daniel napped. She tied her hair back and stepped outside, her hands brushing over the sunflowers as she checked their leaves. One of them stood taller than the rest, its petals slightly darker, and when she leaned closer, she noticed something unusual. At the base of the stem, buried beneath the soil, was a small silver locket. Curious, she brushed off the dirt and opened it carefully. Inside was a faded photograph: Ethan, Grace, and a baby Daniel. The metal felt old, weathered by time and rain. She realized it must have fallen years ago, perhaps the day of the accident when Grace had taken flowers from this very garden before her final drive. The discovery made Amara's heart tighten. She wiped the locket clean and held it against her palm, unsure what to do next. As she turned toward the house, she saw Ethan standing at the balcony above, watching her. Their eyes met, and she hesitated. "You found something," he said, his voice carrying through the still air. She nodded and climbed the steps to meet him. When she placed the locket in his hand, his fingers trembled slightly. "Grace's," he murmured, his voice low. "She wore this every day." He opened it slowly, as though afraid it might vanish if he blinked. The photograph inside was the same one he remembered, their first family portrait. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "Near the sunflowers," Amara said softly. "It must have been there for a long time." Ethan stared at the locket, his jaw tightening. "She must have dropped it that morning," he whispered. "She was taking flowers to the hospital for a charity event. That was the day." His voice trailed off, heavy with memory. Amara placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Maybe it was meant to be found," she said. "Things return to where they belong, even if it takes years." Ethan looked at her, the sunlight catching in his eyes. "You always know what to say." "I just say what feels true," she replied. "The rest belongs to the heart." That evening, Ethan sat in his study with the locket beside him. The house was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic tick of the clock and the distant chirping of crickets. He picked up the bracelet Amara always wore and compared it to the locket. Both pieces of silver, both aged the same way, both engraved with small letters that looked almost identical. On Amara's bracelet were the initials E.J., her mother's. On the back of the locket, in delicate script, were the words, "Forever grateful, E.J." Ethan's pulse quickened. It was her mother, Evelyn James, the nurse who had comforted Grace in her final hours, had given her that locket. His chest tightened as he pieced the story together. Grace must have left the hospital that night with the bracelet's twin, a gift from the woman who had cared for her. It was no coincidence that Amara had come into his home. Fate had simply brought back what kindness had once given away. He stood abruptly, the locket clutched in his hand, and walked to the window overlooking the garden. Amara was there, helping Daniel arrange small lanterns along the path. The boy's laughter floated upward, mingling with the soft hum of Amara's voice. The sight filled Ethan with something he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose, of peace. He walked downstairs and stepped into the garden, the locket still warm in his hand. "Amara," he called. She turned, her face illuminated by the glow of the lanterns. "I think this belongs to you," he said, holding out the locket. Confused, she shook her head. "No, it was your wife's." It was given to her by your mother, Ethan said gently. The inscription on the back, it matches the initials on your bracelet. She gave this to Grace as a gift. Your mother saved her that night. Amara's eyes widened, her breath catching. I did not know, she whispered. She never told me the names. Ethan smiled faintly. Then maybe it was not meant to be told. Maybe it was meant to be found. Amara's eyes glistened as she accepted the locket, her fingers trembling as she opened it again. Daniel looked between them, confused but curious. Is it magic? He asked. Amara smiled through her tears. In a way, yes, she said. It reminds us that love never gets lost. Ethan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Your mother would have liked that, he said. Together, they stood beneath the rising moon, the silver of the locket shining softly between them. It felt as though the past had finally exhaled, its secrets released into the cool evening air. The house behind them glowed with warm light, and for the first time, Ethan understood that the line between loss and grace was thinner than he had ever believed. Some bonds, he realized, were never broken, they simply waited to be rediscovered. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows of the Caldwell estate, washing the rooms in gold. The house was quiet, except for the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen where Amara prepared breakfast. Ethan entered, his expression thoughtful. He had barely slept, his mind still replaying the revelation of the night before. The locket lay on the table between them, gleaming softly in the morning light. Amara looked up from the stove and met his eyes. You did not have to stay up, she said gently. You needed rest. I could not stop thinking about it, Ethan admitted. About your mother, about Grace, about how the two of them crossed paths. It feels like the world is smaller than I ever imagined. Amara smiled faintly. Maybe it is not smaller, she said. Maybe it is just more connected than we think. Daniel ran in then, holding a small wooden box he had found in one of the drawers. Look what I discovered, he said, his voice filled with excitement. He opened it carefully to reveal a collection of tiny keepsakes, old photographs, a ribbon, and a folded note yellowed with age. Ethan frowned slightly. Where did you find that, son? In the study, behind the books, Daniel said proudly. It was hidden. Amara reached for the note with delicate fingers, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting was neat, graceful, and unmistakably feminine. She began to read aloud. Dear Ethan, if you are reading this, it means you have found the locket. There are things that do not fade, even when we leave this world. Tell our son that love never ends, it only changes form. Tell him that the world is still full of good people. Evelyn reminded me of that. Her voice faltered. She looked up, tears forming in her eyes. Ethan took the letter from her hands, his throat tightening as he read the signature. Grace, he whispered. For a moment, silence filled the room. Even Daniel seemed to sense the weight of it, his wide eyes watching his father carefully. Ethan sank into a chair, the letter trembling in his hands. She mentioned your mother, he said quietly. Evelyn reminded her that the world still had good people. Amara nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. It sounds like something my mother would say. She believed that kindness was a bridge between hearts. Ethan looked at her, his voice thick. It seems she built that bridge twice, once for Grace and now for us. Amara said nothing, but her gaze held the quiet understanding of someone who had known both loss and healing. Daniel climbed onto his father's lap, his small hand touching the letter. Is it from Mom? He asked softly. Yes, Ethan said, his voice gentle. She wanted us to remember that love never ends. Daniel smiled faintly. Then maybe she can see us now. Maybe she can, Ethan said, pulling him close. The day passed slowly, filled with a kind of reverent peace. Amara and Daniel spent the afternoon baking cookies while Ethan worked in his study, though his thoughts kept drifting to the letter and the locket. As evening settled in, he walked into the kitchen and found them laughing together, flour dusting their hair and clothes. For the first time in years, the house smelled like cinnamon and sugar instead of silence. He leaned against the doorway, watching them. You two seem to have made quite a mess, he said with a grin. Amara turned, brushing flour from her cheek. A joyful mess, she said. The best kind. Can I try one? Ethan asked. Daniel nodded eagerly, holding up a cookie. You have to pick the best one, he said. This one looks like a heart. Ethan took it and smiled. Then that is the one. Later, After Daniel went to bed, Ethan and Amara sat by the fire. The flames danced softly, painting their faces in warm light. "Do you ever think about how strange it all is?" Ethan asked quietly. "That our lives crossed like this?" Amara nodded. "Sometimes the world brings people together to finish what others began," she said. "Your wife and my mother planted seeds they never saw grow. Maybe we are just the ones watching them bloom." Ethan turned the locket in his hand, the silver catching the light. "Grace once told me she wanted Daniel to grow up surrounded by love, not fear. I failed her for a long time." "You did not fail," Amara said firmly. "You were grieving, and grief is just love that has nowhere to go. Now it has found its way home." Ethan looked at her, gratitude softening his features. "You sound like your mother," he said. Amara smiled. "Then I will take that as the greatest compliment." The clock chimed softly in the background, marking the quiet end of another day. Ethan rose and placed the locket on the mantel beside Grace's photograph. "Welcome home," he whispered. The fire crackled, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the air shimmered with something unseen, a warmth that was not from the flames but from the invisible thread that bound them all together. Amara watched him, her heart full. She had come to this house as a stranger, but now, standing there beneath the soft glow of the fire, she realized that she was part of something much larger than a job or a home. She was part of a story that had begun long before her and would continue long after, carried forward by love that never truly faded. Outside, the wind stirred gently through the garden, rustling the tall sunflowers that seemed to bow their golden heads in quiet blessing. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt almost perfect. The Caldwell home, once haunted by silence, now thrived with laughter, small conversations, and the steady hum of daily life. Daniel was happier than ever, filling every corner with stories and drawings. Ethan, who used to bury himself in work, began leaving his laptop closed for longer stretches of time. He would sit with his son and Amara in the evenings, listening as Daniel read from his favorite books or made up tales about brave knights and talking flowers. The house that had once been cold had become alive, but change, no matter how gentle, often draws shadows behind its light. One afternoon, while Ethan was away at a meeting, the doorbell rang. Amara opened the door to find Mrs. Holloway, the estate's longtime housekeeper, standing stiffly beside a well-dressed woman holding a leather purse. The woman's eyes were sharp, her expression one of practiced politeness. "Good afternoon," she said smoothly. "I am Miss Davenport, Mr. Caldwell's legal consultant. I need to speak with you." Amara wiped her hands on her apron and stepped aside. "Of course," she said, her voice calm though her heart fluttered. "Miss." Davenport looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the flowers, the toys on the floor, the faint scent of cinnamon in the air. "It seems the house has changed," she said. "I remember it being quieter." "Perhaps it needed to be louder," Amara replied softly. Miss Davenport smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I am here because there have been concerns. Certain staff members have expressed that you may be overstepping your position." Amara's hands tightened around the edge of her apron. "I am only doing my job," she said, "taking care of Daniel." "Some might say you have become a little too close to the family," Miss Davenport said, lowering her voice. "There are boundaries, Miss James, and people are talking." Amara drew a steady breath. "I have nothing to hide." "Good," the woman replied, placing a folder on the table. "Then I suggest you remember that your position here is temporary. Mr. Caldwell values loyalty, but he values reputation even more. It would be a shame if someone misunderstood your intentions." The air between them grew heavy. Mrs. Holloway shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Amara with a mix of guilt and worry. Miss Davenport straightened her jacket. "That will be all," she said, turning toward the door. "Have a pleasant evening." When the door closed, the sound echoed like a warning. Amara stood still for a moment, her heart pounding. She did not fear for herself, but for the fragile peace that had taken root in this house. That evening, when Ethan returned, he found Amara quieter than usual. Daniel ran to him, holding a paper airplane, oblivious to the tension in the air. "Dad, look, it flies all the way across the room." Ethan laughed and ruffled his hair. "That is amazing, buddy." But when his eyes met Amara's, He saw something in her expression that unsettled him. After Daniel went to bed, Ethan found her in the kitchen, wiping down the counter though it was already spotless. "Something happened today," he said, not as a question but as a certainty. Amara hesitated. "Miss Davenport came by," she said softly. "She said there were concerns about how close I have become with you and Daniel." Ethan frowned deeply. "She had no right to speak to you that way. I will take care of it." "Please do not," Amara said quickly. "I do not want to cause trouble." "You are not causing trouble," Ethan said firmly. "You have done more for this family than anyone else in years." "That is exactly why they are talking," Amara said. "People do not like change, especially when it makes them face what was missing." Ethan looked at her, his voice quieter now. "Do you want to leave?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I want to stay. For Daniel. But I also know what it feels like to be judged before people know your story." "Then they will learn it," Ethan said. "They will see the truth." Amara smiled faintly. "Truth has a way of revealing itself, Mr. Caldwell. You do not need to fight for it. Just live it." Her words lingered in the air, gentle but powerful. The next morning, Ethan called a meeting with his staff. Daniel sat on the stairs, half hidden but listening. "I have heard there has been gossip," Ethan said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "Let me make this clear. Miss James is part of this household. She has done nothing but care for my son and bring warmth back into this home. Anyone who cannot respect that can collect their pay by the end of the week." Silence filled the room. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Mrs. Holloway lowered her eyes in shame. When the meeting ended, Ethan looked toward the staircase where Daniel Saturday. "Come here, buddy," he said. Daniel ran down and hugged his father's leg. "Did they do something mean to Amara?" he asked. "Not anymore," Ethan said. "Sometimes adults forget how to be kind, but we can remind them." That evening, as the sun set over the garden, Amara watched Ethan and Daniel play catch near the tall sunflowers. The laughter that filled the air was no longer fragile. It was strong, full of life. Still, in her heart, she knew peace often walked a narrow line. For every kindness, there would always be a shadow testing its strength. But as she stood there, the locket warm against her chest, she whispered to herself, "Storms only prove how deep the roots go." Inside the house, the lights glowed softly, a steady reminder that love, when true, had nothing to hide. The week that followed brought a quiet calm back to the Caldwell estate. The tension that had briefly crept into the walls seemed to dissolve with each passing day, replaced by something steady and warm. Ethan kept his promise to Amara. There were no more whispered conversations among the staff, no more sideways glances. Instead, the house returned to its gentle rhythm of mornings filled with sunlight and evenings wrapped in laughter. Daniel had grown more confident, running through the halls with his drawings and filling every space with energy. One morning, Ethan sat on the edge of the garden bench watching his son and Amara as they tended to the sunflowers. Daniel's hands were covered in dirt, and his laughter echoed through the air like music. "Dad," Daniel called out. "Look, they are taller than me now." Ethan smiled, shading his eyes from the sundae. "That is because they had good gardeners," he said. "And good love," Amara added, brushing her hands on her jeans. Ethan stood and joined them, kneeling beside the flowers. "They are beautiful," he said, "but not as beautiful as this moment." Daniel giggled and handed his father a small watering can. "You have to help, Dad. You cannot just watch." Ethan obeyed, pouring water into the soil. For a while, none of them spoke. The sound of birds, the smell of wet earth, and the soft warmth of sunlight created a peace so deep it felt like time itself had slowed. Later, as they headed back inside, Ethan noticed something. Amara was quieter than usual, her expression thoughtful. "Is something on your mind?" he asked as they walked through the hall. She hesitated. "It is nothing," she said softly. "I just sometimes wonder how long things like this can last." Ethan stopped and looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Happiness," she said. "It feels fragile, like it could disappear if you breathe too loudly." "Maybe that is what makes it precious," he replied, "but I have no intention of letting it fade." Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, there was an unspoken understanding, a connection neither of them tried to name. That evening, Ethan decided to change something. For years, he had avoided the dining room where he and Grace once shared meals, preferring to eat in his study or the kitchen. But that night, he asked the staff to set the long table with candles and dinnerware. When Amara and Daniel came downstairs, they found Ethan waiting, dressed neatly but with a nervous smile. "What is all this?" Amara asked, surprised. "Dinner," Ethan said simply. "At the big table, the way it should be." Daniel's eyes lit up. "Can we light the candles?" "Yes," Ethan said. "You can do the honors." As Daniel carefully struck a match and lit each candle, the room filled with a warm golden glow. They sat together, sharing stories and laughter. Daniel told jokes that made no sense, and Ethan laughed harder than he had in years. Amara watched them, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and disbelief. She had seen so many homes in her life, but none that carried this kind of fragile beauty where grief and love existed side by side, and every smile felt like a small victory. After dinner, Daniel fell asleep on the couch, his head resting on a cushion. Ethan covered him with a blanket, then turned to Amara. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For being here," he replied. "For staying when things were not easy. For helping me remember how to live." "You do not need to thank me," she said. "You gave me a home when I needed one." "No," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "You gave us one." She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. "Then I guess we built it together." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of the flowers from the garden. For a moment, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan looked at the photo of Grace on the mantel, the locket gleaming beside it. He whispered silently, "We are okay now." The next morning, Daniel woke before sunrise and ran to his father's room, shaking him awake. "Dad, come see." The first sunflower opened. Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Already?" "Yes," Daniel said, practically bouncing. Ethan laughed and followed him to the garden. The early light painted everything gold. And there, in the center of the row, stood the tallest sunflower, its petals wide and glowing. Amara was already there, kneeling beside it. When she looked up, she smiled. "It is beautiful," she said. "The first to bloom." Ethan placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It is a sign," he said. "Of what?" Daniel asked. "That sometimes, even after storms, things find their way to the light." Amara nodded, her gaze gentle. "Your mother would have loved this," she said softly. Ethan looked at her, the sunlight catching in his eyes. "So would your mother." For a moment, the three of them stood there in silence, united not by blood but by something deeper: shared loss, shared love, and the quiet miracle of finding family where they least expected it. The sunflower swayed slightly in the morning breeze, its face turned toward the sun, as if it understood that healing, once begun, would always continue to grow. Summer arrived with long golden days and evenings that stretched lazily into soft twilight. The Caldwell estate looked alive under the warmth of the sun, with flowers blooming across the gardens and laughter often echoing through the hallways. Ethan had taken to working from home more often, his schedule bending around Daniel's joy instead of the other way around. Amara continued her quiet rhythm, moving through the house like light itself, gentle, steady, and impossible to ignore. One morning, as the family finished breakfast on the terrace, a black car pulled up to the driveway. Ethan's brow furrowed. He had not expected visitors. The door opened, and a tall woman stepped out, sharp suit, dark glasses, heels clicking against the stone. It was Miss Davenport again, but this time she was not alone. Beside her stood a man in his 60s with gray hair and a polished cane. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Uncle Richard," he said, standing. Daniel looked up curiously. "Dad, who is that?" "My late wife's uncle," Ethan answered quietly. "He has not visited in a long time." The older man approached with a tight smile. "Ethan," he said, "you look well. It has been years." "And yet it feels like no time at all," Ethan replied, his tone guarded. "What brings you here?" Richard glanced toward Amara and Daniel. "I heard there have been changes in this house. A new nanny, a new influence. Some of the board members are concerned." "Concerned about what?" Ethan asked coldly. "About your image," Richard said. "You have responsibilities to your company, your name, your son's future." It does not look good for you to keep someone of her background living under your roof. The air grew heavy. Amara froze where she stood, her expression calm but her hands trembling slightly. Ethan's eyes darkened. Her background? He repeated slowly. She is the best thing that has happened to this house. She has brought my son back to life. And yet rumors spread easily, Richard said. You know how people talk. You are risking your reputation for sentiment. Ethan took a step closer, his voice low and steady. Reputation means nothing if it costs me my humanity. Miss. Davenport shifted uncomfortably, but Richard continued. You are forgetting your position, Ethan. The world watches you. It will not understand this arrangement. Then the world can look somewhere else, Ethan said firmly, because this arrangement is my family. Daniel, sensing the tension, tugged at Amara's sleeve. Why are they angry? He whispered. Amara knelt down beside him. They are not angry, sweetheart, she said softly. They just do not understand yet. Ethan's uncle turned toward her, his voice clipped. Miss James, I think it is best if you leave before things become more complicated. Amara stood slowly, meeting his gaze with quiet dignity. With all due respect, sir, this is not your home. Richard frowned, clearly unused to being challenged. I will not stand here and be spoken to by the woman who raised my son when I could not? Ethan interrupted. By the woman who brought back the laughter that you and your world of power took from me? Then maybe you should not be standing here at all. The older man's expression hardened. You will regret this. No, Ethan said. I will regret every day I lived without kindness. But not this. Richard turned sharply, motioning to Miss Davenport. Come, we are done here. The car engine roared to life, and within moments, they were gone, leaving behind the echo of words that could no longer hurt anyone. Ethan turned to Amara, his voice softening. I am sorry you had to hear that. You do not need to apologize, she said. The truth does not need defending. It just needs living. Daniel climbed into his father's arms, looking up at him. I do not like that man, he said. Ethan kissed the top of his head. Neither do I, son, but sometimes people act out of fear, not hate. Amara smiled faintly. That is something my mother used to say. The rest of the day passed quietly. The three of them spent the afternoon in the garden, where Daniel insisted on watering every flower twice, just in case. By evening, the tension had faded, replaced by the familiar comfort of home. After Daniel went to bed, Ethan and Amara stood on the terrace overlooking the rows of sunflowers glowing faintly under the moonlight. Do you ever wish things were different? Ethan asked quietly. No, Amara said. I think everything happens the way it should. Even pain can grow something beautiful if you let it. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the garden. You have more strength than anyone I know. It is not strength, she said softly. It is faith. My mother used to say that love is not about deserving it, is about showing up. And you, Ethan, you showed up. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The night was still, and the stars above seemed to listen. Inside, the locket rested on the mantel beside Grace's photo, glinting in the firelight like a silent witness to all that had been lost and found again. In that quiet, Ethan realized that the fight was not against the world outside, it was against the walls he had built within himself. And for the first time, those walls had finally begun to fall. The air in the Caldwell home softened again after the storm of words and judgments had passed. Days turned into weeks, and peace began to settle back into its rightful place. Autumn approached, painting the trees in shades of amber and gold, and the garden that once stood green and wild now shimmered with the colors of change. Ethan often found himself standing by the window, watching Daniel and Amara gather fallen leaves into piles, their laughter blending with the crisp wind. Every so often, Daniel would stop to throw a handful of leaves into the air, shouting, "Look, Dad, it is raining sunshine." Ethan would laugh, the sound deep and unguarded, and for a moment, everything in the world felt right again. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Daniel sat at the dining table with crayons scattered around him. He was writing something with fierce concentration, his small hand gripping the pencil tightly. Amara peeked over his shoulder. "What are you working on so seriously?" she asked. Daniel grinned, his eyes bright with excitement. "It is my Christmas letter," he said. "It is early," she teased gently. "Christmas is months away." "I know," he said, "but I need to send it early so Santa has time to think about it." She smiled. "And what are you asking for this year?" Daniel paused for a long moment, then looked up. "Nothing you can buy," he said quietly. Amara's smile faded into curiosity. "What do you mean?" "You will see," Daniel said with a mysterious grin. When Ethan returned from the office that night, Daniel ran to him immediately. "Dad, can I mail something?" he asked. "I already sealed it," Ethan chuckled. "Sure, but it is a bit early for Christmas, isn't it?" "It is important," Daniel said earnestly. Ethan nodded, amused by his son's seriousness. "All right, we will drop it off tomorrow." The next morning, after sending the envelope, Daniel's excitement lingered for days. He seemed lighter, happier, as though he were holding on to a secret hope. Amara noticed but did not ask. She knew some hopes were meant to bloom in their own time. Weeks passed, and one afternoon in late November, Ethan came home early to find Daniel sitting on the porch steps with a notebook in his lap. "Hey, buddy," Ethan said, sitting beside him. "What are you writing now?" "A new letter," Daniel said without looking up. "To Santa again?" "No," Daniel said. "To Mom." Ethan froze for a moment. "What do you want to tell her?" he asked softly. Daniel's pencil slowed. "I want to tell her that I am okay now, that you laugh again, that Amara makes the best pancakes, and that I am not scared anymore." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of pride and sorrow. "She would love that," he said quietly. "You can tell her anything. She always listens." Daniel nodded seriously. "Do you think she can see us?" "I do," Ethan said. "I think she is proud of you every single day." Daniel smiled, satisfied with that answer, and went back to his writing. That night, after Daniel went to bed, Ethan found Amara in the kitchen washing dishes. "He wrote a letter to Grace," Ethan said. "He told her he was happy." Amara looked up, her expression soft. "Then that means she can rest, and so can you." Ethan leaned against the counter. "Do you ever think about what your mother would say if she saw you now?" "All the time," Amara said. "I think she would tell me she is proud too. She used to say that love leaves fingerprints on the heart. I think she left hers here." She placed her hand gently on her chest. Ethan smiled faintly. "She did, and so did you." Outside, the wind rustled through the last of the golden leaves, carrying the faint chill of winter's approach. The next morning, the mail arrived: letters, bills, and one small envelope addressed to Daniel in unfamiliar handwriting. Ethan noticed it and placed it on the table. When Daniel came down for breakfast, he gasped. "It came," he said, snatching the letter and tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in neat, elegant handwriting. He read aloud, "Dear Daniel, thank you for your letter. Your wish is very special, and it is already coming true. You asked for something that cannot be wrapped, but it has been growing around you every day. Love, Santa." Ethan frowned slightly, realizing what it was. "You sent a letter asking for love, didn't you?" Daniel nodded shyly. "I asked for Amara to stay forever." Amara froze, the dishcloth slipping from her hands. Ethan's heart clenched as he looked at his son. "Why did you ask for that?" Daniel shrugged. "Because when she is here, everything feels like Mom is smiling again." The room went silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. Amara bent down and hugged Daniel tightly. "You are the sweetest boy I have ever met," she whispered. "I will never forget that." Daniel looked at her earnestly. "You are part of our family now. You have to stay." Ethan's eyes met hers across the table. Something unspoken passed between them, a promise, fragile but real. Later that evening, after Daniel fell asleep, Ethan found the letter again and read it once more. The words were simple but powerful, reminding him of something he had nearly forgotten, that love, once planted, did not vanish with time or distance. It grew, quietly and persistently, in the hearts of those who dared to believe in it. He folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the locket on the mantel. Then, standing in the warm glow of the fire, he whispered into the quiet room, "Your wish came true, Daniel, more than you know." December arrived quietly, bringing with it a soft chill that wrapped around the Caldwell estate like a whisper. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing the garden in white and turning the sunflowers into fragile silhouettes beneath the frost. Daniel was the first to spot it, pressing his nose against the cold window and shouting, "Snow! It is snowing! Amara, Dad, come see." Ethan and Amara joined him at the window, watching the flakes drift slowly through the gray morning light. Daniel's excitement was contagious. "Can we build a snowman, please?" he asked, his eyes wide with hope. Ethan smiled. "Of course we can, but only if you promise to wear your gloves this time." "I promise," Daniel said, already running to fetch them. Outside, the air was crisp and bright. Daniel rolled the snow with determination, his cheeks flushed red from the cold. Amara helped shape the middle section while Ethan struggled to find sticks for the arms. "He needs a hat," Daniel said thoughtfully. Amara looked down at the old knitted hat she wore and smiled. "Here," she said, placing it gently on the snowman's head. "Now he looks perfect." Daniel clapped his hands. "We should name him," he said. "How about Sunny? Because he makes everything brighter." Ethan laughed softly. "That sounds like a perfect name." They stood together, admiring their creation as the snow continued to fall. For a moment, the world felt suspended in quiet joy. Later, after they returned inside to warm up by the fire, Daniel curled up on the couch with a blanket. "Do you think Sunny will be here tomorrow?" he asked sleepily. "If the sun is kind, yes," Amara said with a smile. "But even if he melts, he will come back next time it snows, like people we love," Ethan added softly. Daniel nodded, his eyes growing heavy. "Then I will see him again," he murmured before drifting to sleep. That evening, Ethan and Amara sat by the fire while Daniel slept. The flames flickered, casting golden light across the room. "He is growing so fast," Amara said quietly. "Every day he surprises me." "He has you to thank for that," Ethan said. "You gave him back his laughter." "He already had it," she replied. "He just needed permission to use it again." Ethan studied her face for a long moment, the soft glow of the fire dancing in her eyes. "Do you ever miss home?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Every day. But I think home is not always a place. Sometimes it is a person, or a feeling. Sometimes it is just knowing you belong somewhere." He nodded. "Then I hope you know you belong here." Her eyes met his, filled with warmth and quiet emotion. "I do," she said softly. The next day, Ethan received an unexpected phone call from his Uncle Richard. "Ethan," the older man began stiffly, "the board has reconsidered. The rumors have settled, and your public image remains intact. But I must warn you, people are still watching." Ethan's voice remained calm. "They can watch all they want. My life is not a performance." "Be careful," Richard said sharply. "You are walking a fine line." "No," Ethan replied. "For the first time, I am walking the right one." He ended the call and stood for a long moment, looking out the window where Amara and Daniel were throwing snowballs. Their laughter floated up to him like music, and he felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. That night, the three of them decorated the Christmas tree together. Daniel hung each ornament with care, occasionally stopping to admire the lights. "It is beautiful," he whispered. Amara handed him a small silver star. "This one goes on top," she said. "You do it, Daniel." Ethan lifted his son so he could reach the top branch, and together they placed the star where it caught the glow of every light in the room. When they stepped back, the tree shimmered with warmth and color. "It is perfect," Amara said. "Not perfect," Ethan replied, smiling, "but real." Daniel turned to her suddenly. "Amara, what did you wish for this Christmas?" She hesitated, glancing at Ethan before answering. "I think I already got my wish," she said softly. Daniel beamed. "Then maybe Santa gave you love too." The innocence in his words filled the room with quiet emotion. Later that night, when Daniel had gone to bed, Ethan placed another log on the fire. "You know," he said, "I used to dread this time of year. It reminded me of everything I lost. But now, it reminds me of everything I have left." "You did not lose anything that love cannot reach," Amara said gently. "Love does not end. It changes shape, but it is still here." "Like snow," he said, smiling faintly. "It melts, but it always returns." Amara nodded. Exactly. Outside, the world was still, the snow glowing faintly under the moonlight. Inside, the fire crackled softly, and for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell felt the warmth of Christmas not as a memory but as something alive and present. He looked at Amara, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and felt gratitude deeper than words could express. Love, he realized, did not need grand declarations. It was already written in the quiet moments, in the laughter of a child, in the simple act of choosing kindness again and again. And as the snow fell silently outside, it felt as if the world itself was whispering back the same truth, that even the coldest winters carry the promise of light. The days leading up to Christmas moved softly, like a song the house already knew by heart. The snow outside the Caldwell estate grew deeper, blanketing the world in white, while inside the warmth of the fire and laughter of family filled every corner. Daniel had made a new tradition of placing little paper hearts around the house with messages written in his uneven handwriting. Some said thank you, others said, you are loved, and one, taped to Amara's door, simply read, you make our house happy. Every morning Amara found another, and every morning she tucked it away like a small treasure. Ethan noticed the same quiet joy in his son that Grace used to have, an openness to life that only love could give back. One evening, as the family sat around the dining table, Daniel suddenly announced, I want to do something special for Christmas Eve. Amara smiled. What kind of special? Daniel thought for a moment. Like a surprise for everyone, but it has to be secret. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Even from me? Especially from you, Daniel said seriously. Ethan chuckled. Then I guess I will wait. For the next few days, Daniel worked on his surprise in secret. Amara helped only when asked, respecting his determination. The boy spent hours drawing, cutting paper, and whispering plans to the family's cook, who promised not to tell a soul. On the morning of Christmas Eve, the house felt alive with anticipation. The smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air, and snowflakes drifted lazily past the windows. Ethan stood near the fireplace, watching the fire crackle, while Amara arranged candles on the table. Daniel appeared wearing his best sweater, holding a small box wrapped in gold paper. It is time, he announced proudly. Ethan knelt to his level. Time for what, buddy? For the Christmas wish, Daniel said. He handed the box to his father. You have to open it together with Amara. Amara blinked, surprised. Daniel, what is this? Just open it, he said, grinning. Ethan carefully removed the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside were two small items, a paper heart, like the ones Daniel had hidden around the house, and a folded note. Ethan unfolded the paper, reading aloud. My Christmas wish is for our family to stay like this forever, for Dad to smile every day, for Amara to stay with us, and for Mom to know that we are happy. Love, Daniel. The room fell silent except for the soft crackle of the fire. Amara pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening. Ethan's throat tightened as he looked at his son. Daniel, he said softly, that is the most beautiful wish I have ever heard. Daniel looked up at him, his expression serious. Then you have to make it come true. Ethan swallowed hard. I will try my best. No, Daniel said firmly. You have to promise. Ethan smiled through the emotion welling in his chest. I promise. That night, after Daniel went to bed, Ethan found Amara standing by the window, watching the snowfall. The glow of the Christmas tree lights cast a halo around her. You made his Christmas perfect, he said quietly. He did that himself, she replied. All I did was help him believe. He believes because of you, Ethan said. You gave him that hope. She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the light of the tree. Hope does not belong to one person. It grows when people share it. You planted it, Ethan. I just helped it bloom. He looked at her for a long time before speaking again. Do you know what he wished for? She nodded. He told me yesterday. Ethan smiled faintly. And what did you tell him? I told him that families are not just born. Sometimes they are built from kindness. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and endless. Inside, the warmth of the fire wrapped around them like an embrace. Ethan took a deep breath. You have changed everything, Amara. Before you came, I did not think I had anything left to give. You did, she said. You just needed a reason. And you gave me one, he said. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock and the steady rhythm of their breathing. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice quiet but certain. Stay, not because of duty or kindness. Stay because you are part of this family now. Amara's eyes softened. Are you sure? More than I have ever been sure of anything, he said. Daniel was right. You are what made this house a home again. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. Then I will stay, because this is where I belong. Ethan nodded, his chest heavy with emotion. Merry Christmas, Amara. Merry Christmas, Ethan, she whispered. As the night deepened, snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in silence. Daniel stirred in his sleep, smiling as if he could feel the warmth of the love that surrounded him even in dreams. And in that quiet, golden-lit room, 3 hearts that had once been strangers were now bound together by something unspoken but eternal. Love had rebuilt what loss had taken, and the house that had once stood as a monument to grief now pulsed with the quiet, steady heartbeat of family. The morning after Christmas dawned quietly, with sunlight spilling through the frosted windows and filling the Caldwell home with a golden glow. The snow outside sparkled like tiny stars scattered across the ground. Daniel was the first to wake, running down the hallway in his pajamas and shouting, "It is still snowing. Come on, Amara. Come on, Dad." His laughter echoed through the house, pulling both adults from the warmth of sleep. Ethan followed his son downstairs, still in his robe, a smile tugging at his lips. Amara was already in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa. "Good morning," she greeted softly. "Good morning," Ethan replied. "He has been awake since dawn. Excitement keeps him warmer than blankets," she said with a smile. Daniel burst into the kitchen, his cheeks flushed from running. "Can we go sledding today? Please." Ethan looked at the snow outside and nodded. "Yes, but only if Amara comes too." Daniel's face lit up. "Deal." A few hours later, the 3 of them trudged up the small hill behind the garden, bundled in scarves and hats. The sled creaked beneath their weight as Daniel climbed on first, gripping the sides tightly. "Ready?" Ethan asked. "Ready," Daniel shouted. Amara laughed as she sat behind him, and Ethan gave the sled a gentle push. It raced down the hill, their laughter ringing through the crisp winter air. For a moment, time seemed to slow, the snow swirling around them, the sunlight glinting off the trees, and the joy in Daniel's voice echoing like a melody that could never fade. When they reached the bottom, Amara fell back into the snow, breathless and laughing. "That was faster than I expected," she said. Daniel flopped beside her, still giggling. "We need to go again." Ethan walked down after them, shaking his head with amusement. "You two are unstoppable." "You are just scared," Daniel teased. "Maybe I am," Ethan said, smiling. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of laughter, snowball fights, and moments so bright that they felt eternal. Later, when they returned to the house, cold but happy, Ethan made hot chocolate while Amara and Daniel hung their wet clothes by the fire. Daniel curled up in his blanket, sipping his drink, his eyelids drooping. "Best day ever," he murmured sleepily. "Even better than Christmas." Amara brushed a hand through his hair. "Then it must have been a good one." "It was," he said softly, "because we were all together." When he finally drifted to sleep on the couch, Ethan stood beside Amara, watching him. "He has changed so much," Ethan said quietly. "You have changed us all," she replied. "Do you realize that?" "Maybe," Ethan said, "but I think you are the reason it happened." She shook her head gently. "Healing does not come from one person. It comes from love finding its way back." Ethan turned to her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "I used to believe love ended when someone was gone," he said. "Now I know it just changes shape." "That is because you let it," she said softly. He smiled. "You sound like your mother again." "She would have liked you," Amara said. "She always believed people were capable of more kindness than they showed." "She was right," Ethan said. "And so are you." The rest of the afternoon was peaceful. Snow continued to fall outside, the house alive with warmth and quiet joy. As the day faded into evening, Ethan found himself in his study, looking at the photograph of Grace, and the small silver locket beside it. He touched it gently, feeling the cool metal against his fingers. "You would have liked her too," he whispered. "She reminds me of you, strong, kind, brave." Behind him, Amara appeared at the doorway. "Talking to her again?" she asked softly. Ethan turned, smiling. "Always." "I think she hears you," Amara said. "I think she is proud." Ethan nodded. "Maybe she is. Maybe that is why this place feels alive again. Because she is still here," Amara said, "just in a different way." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Do you believe that?" "I do," she said. "Love does not leave. It just finds new homes." That night, after Daniel was tucked in bed, Amara stepped out onto the porch. The snow had stopped, leaving a stillness so pure it almost hummed. The stars above were sharp and clear, and the air carried the faint scent of pine and wood smoke. Ethan joined her a few minutes later, standing beside her in silence. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is," he agreed. "I used to hate winter. It felt like everything was dead. Now it feels like everything is resting, waiting to bloom again." Amara looked at him with a small smile. "That is what healing looks like, Ethan. Not forgetting, just learning to live again." He nodded, his gaze soft. "Then maybe I am finally learning." "You are," she said. They stood together, watching the stars. Inside, the fire flickered gently, its glow spilling through the windows. Daniel stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly, "Amara, Dad," as if even in dreams he could feel the warmth that surrounded him. And for the first time in a very long time, the Caldwell home was not just a house filled with memories. It was a living, breathing place of love, a promise that light could always find its way back, no matter how long the winter lasted. January arrived with pale skies and quiet mornings, the kind where the world seemed to pause between breaths. The snow had begun to melt, leaving patches of green beneath the white. Inside the Caldwell estate, life settled into a new kind of calm. Ethan spent more time at home. Daniel returned to school with excitement, and Amara continued her gentle presence, balancing warmth, laughter, and quiet wisdom in every corner she touched. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the wide kitchen windows, Daniel sat at the table drawing with his colored pencils. "It is for the school art fair," he explained proudly, when Amara leaned over to see. On the paper was a house surrounded by tall yellow flowers and 3 stick figures holding hands. "That is us," he said. "You, Dad, and me, our family." Amara smiled softly, her heart tightening with emotion. "It is beautiful, Daniel." "Do you think it is okay that I wrote our last name on top?" he asked innocently. "It says the Caldwells." Amara froze for a moment before finding her voice. "If that is what your heart says, then yes, it is more than okay." Ethan walked in just in time to hear, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "I think that looks perfect, buddy," Daniel beamed. "Then I will hang it at the fair." After breakfast, Amara prepared to take Daniel to school. As she helped him zip his jacket, Ethan handed her a folded piece of paper. "It is for you," he said. She opened it later that afternoon when she returned. It was a note written in Ethan's neat handwriting. "Thank you for making this place a home again. Thank you for giving my son his childhood back. I do not say it enough, but we are better because of you." She read it twice, her throat tightening. That evening, Ethan found her in the garden, brushing snow from the sunflower's dormant stalks. "You do not have to tend them in winter," he said gently. "They will come back on their own." "I know," she replied, "but it feels right to remind them that someone is waiting." "Like faith," he said. "Exactly," she whispered. The next day brought a change. Ethan received a phone call from one of his company's board members, requesting his presence in the city for a week-long business retreat. It would be the first time he had been away from home since Amara's arrival. He hesitated before agreeing. That evening, when he told Daniel, the boy's face fell. "A whole week?" he asked. "It is just work, buddy," Ethan said. "You and Amara will take care of things while I am gone." "Can I come?" Daniel asked hopefully. "Not this time," Ethan replied gently, "but I will call you every night." Amara watched the exchange quietly. When Daniel went upstairs, she turned to Ethan. "He will be fine," she said. "He has learned how to wait." Ethan sighed. "I know, but it feels strange leaving him." leaving you both. We will be here when you get back, she said. That is a promise. The morning Ethan left, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. Daniel stood on the porch, waving until the car disappeared down the long driveway. I do not like when he is gone, he said softly. Amara knelt beside him. He will come back soon. Sometimes people have to go away to take care of things, but that does not mean they stop loving you. I know, Daniel said. I just wish the days went faster. To make the time pass, Amara filled their days with warmth. They baked cookies, read stories by the fire, and walked to the park after school. Every evening, they spoke to Ethan on the phone. How are my two favorite people? His voice would ask through the speaker. We are great, Daniel would shout. Amara burned the cookies. She laughed in the background. He is exaggerating. They were just crispy. Crispy is just another word for love, Ethan said, and Daniel giggled. The house stayed filled with laughter, but at night, when Daniel slept, Amara sometimes found herself standing by the window, missing Ethan's quiet presence, the way his voice steadied the air around her. On the sixth night, a storm rolled in, fierce and sudden. The wind howled, and the trees bent beneath the weight of snow. The lights flickered twice before going out completely. Daniel ran downstairs, frightened. Amara, the lights. It is okay, she said calmly, lighting a candle. It is just the wind. We are safe. She pulled a blanket around them both and sat near the fire. Want to tell me a story? Daniel asked, his voice small. All right, she said. Once there was a little boy who planted a garden with his father. The flowers grew tall. But one day, a storm came and bent them all. The boy was sad, but his father told him, storms cannot take away roots. They only test how strong they are. And when the sun came back, the flowers grew even taller. That sounds like our garden, Daniel said sleepily. It is, Amara whispered. And you are one of those flowers. By the time the storm passed, Daniel was asleep in her arms. She carried him upstairs, tucking him into bed. Standing by the window, she looked out at the garden bathed in moonlight. The world was silent again, calm after the chaos. At that moment, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. I will be home tomorrow. Tell Daniel I miss him. She smiled softly and typed back. He knows. We both do. That night, as she lay awake listening to the soft sound of Daniel's breathing, she realized that love had a rhythm all its own. It did not depend on presence or distance. It lived quietly in the spaces between, growing stronger with every test. And as the first light of dawn touched the edges of the sky, Amara whispered to herself, we will all bloom again when he returns. The morning after the storm was clear and bright, the kind of morning that seemed to erase the night's fear. The Caldwell estate glistened under the sun, snow melting from the roof and dripping like silver threads. Daniel woke early, running into Amara's room still in his pajamas. Is Dad home yet? He asked eagerly. Not yet, Amara said, smiling softly. But he will be here soon. You should get dressed, so you can surprise him. Daniel grinned and hurried off, his small feet thudding across the floor. Amara moved through the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The scent of pancakes filled the air, sweet and warm. By the time she set the table, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway made her heart skip. Daniel ran to the window and shouted, It is him. Dad is home. Ethan stepped out of the car, his coat dusted with frost, and when he saw his son racing toward him, he opened his arms wide. Daniel threw himself into the embrace, laughing. You are back. I told you I would be, Ethan said, lifting him up. His eyes met Amara's as she appeared at the doorway. And you kept everything running, he said. I had the best help, she replied. He was brave during the storm. Ethan smiled and ruffled his son's hair. Of course he was. He is my little sunflower. They ate breakfast together, and the room hummed with warmth. For a long time, Ethan simply listened Daniel talking about the storm, Amara describing the week, the quiet moments that had filled the house in his absence. When they finished eating, Daniel ran off to play, leaving Ethan and Amara by the window watching him. You look tired, she said gently. It was a long week, he admitted. Meetings, decisions, endless talking. but all I could think about was coming home. Home, she repeated softly, tasting the word. It suits you again. Ethan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Do you ever wonder how different life might have been if you had not come here? Every day, she said. But I think it would have found us anyway. Some things are meant to be. The afternoon passed peacefully. Daniel spent hours outside building a snow fort, occasionally calling for his father's help. Ethan joined him, and the sound of their laughter carried across the yard. Amara watched from the porch, her heart swelling with quiet pride. Later, when the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan joined her on the porch steps. Do you know what I realized while I was away? He said. What is that? She asked. That I do not miss the old life anymore. The noise, the expectations, the endless chase for things that never mattered. Then what do you want now? She asked softly. He looked at the horizon for a moment before answering. This. Just this. A home that breathes, laughter that fills it, people who remind me who I am. Amara's voice was gentle. Then you already have what you want. Ethan nodded. Because of you. She shook her head slightly. Because of all of us. Healing is never one person's doing. He smiled faintly. You always know the right thing to say. Only because I had a mother who taught me that truth is kinder than silence, she said. And you have lived that truth. Ethan replied. The evening grew colder, but neither of them moved. The stars began to appear one by one, and the house behind them glowed softly through the windows. Daniel's shadow moved across the curtains as he played in the living room, humming to himself. He reminds me of her sometimes, Ethan said suddenly. Grace, when he laughs like that. She must have been wonderful, Amara said. She was, Ethan replied. She loved fiercely, and she believed in goodness, even when life gave her reasons not to. Then she would be proud of you, Amara said, for keeping that goodness alive. He looked at her then, his eyes soft. I think she would be proud of you too. The next day brought a quiet rhythm back to the house. Ethan returned to his study, Daniel to his toys, and Amara to the familiar sounds of cooking and tidying. But something had changed, something subtle and steady, like the heartbeat of a house that knew it was alive again. That afternoon, Ethan called Daniel and Amara into the living room. I have something for you both, he said. On the table sat a small wooden box. Daniel's eyes lit up. Is it a present? Ethan nodded. Sort of. It belonged to Grace. I found it in my office while I was away. He opened it carefully. Inside were 3 small charms. A silver sunflower, a tiny heart, and a small key. She collected these, he said. Each one meant something to her. The sunflower was for hope, the heart for love, and the key for new beginnings. Daniel reached out, his fingers tracing the sunflower. Can we keep them? They are for all of us, Ethan said. Because this family has all 3. Amara looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. No, he said. Thank you for giving me a reason to open that box again. Daniel placed the sunflower charm into Amara's hand. You should have this one, he said. You made everything grow. Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded. Then I will keep it safe. As evening fell, they sat together by the fire, the air filled with the soft hum of peace. Outside, the snow began again, gentle and unhurried. The world seemed to hold its breath, and in that stillness, love lingered not loud or demanding, but steady and true, like the quiet promise of spring waiting beneath the winter frost. The last traces of winter began to fade as February unfolded, bringing the first hints of spring to the Caldwell estate. The snow melted slowly, revealing damp earth and tiny shoots of green pushing through the soil. The air was still cool but carried a promise of renewal. Ethan stood by the window of his study one morning, watching Amara and Daniel in the garden. Daniel wore his bright yellow boots, jumping over puddles and pointing excitedly at the small buds appearing on the branches. Look, Amara, he shouted. The flowers are coming back. She smiled, kneeling to brush her hand gently over the earth. They always do, Daniel. They just wait for the right time. Her words lingered in Ethan's mind as he stepped away from the window. The rhythm of their days had become something sacred, a quiet harmony built from trust, laughter, and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. Yet, Beneath the calm, Ethan sensed change approaching like the way the air feels just before rain. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Amara held the silver sunflower charm between her fingers. The firelight danced across its surface, reflecting tiny sparks of gold. Daniel was asleep on the couch, his head resting against Ethan's arm. "You look thoughtful," Ethan said softly. "What are you thinking about?" "About roots," Amara replied. "About how deep they go before you even notice they are there." "Are you talking about the garden again?" he asked with a faint smile. She shook her head. "No, about life. About how sometimes we do not realize how much we belong somewhere until the thought of leaving hurts." Ethan's expression shifted. "Are you planning to leave?" "No," she said quickly. "At least, not now. But I know that nothing lasts forever. I have learned to make peace with that. Maybe some things do last," Ethan said quietly. "Maybe love is one of them." She looked at him for a long moment before whispering, "Maybe." The next morning, Daniel bounded into the kitchen holding a letter from school. "It says they are having a family day," he announced proudly. "Parents and teachers and games. You both have to come." "Both of us?" Ethan asked with a smile. "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "Because you are both my family." Amara hesitated, glancing at Ethan, but his nod settled the matter. "We will be there," he said. Family day arrived with clear skies and the smell of freshly cut grass. The schoolyard buzzed with laughter, children running in every direction. Daniel held their hands tightly as they walked in. "I told everyone you were coming," he said proudly. "They are going to see that I have the best family." Ethan chuckled. "No pressure, huh?" Daniel giggled and ran off to join his friends. Amara and Ethan watched from a distance, standing near the playground fence. "He looks so happy," Ethan said softly. "He is," Amara replied. "He feels safe." "Because of you," he said. "Because of us," she corrected. Throughout the day, they joined in the games, three-legged races, art contests, and laughter that carried across the schoolyard. Parents and teachers greeted Ethan politely, some with curiosity, some with genuine warmth, but for the first time, he did not feel the weight of judgment. The only thing that mattered was the small boy who kept turning around to make sure they were watching him. Later, during the closing ceremony, the principal announced that each child had written something about their family. When Daniel's turn came, he stood on the small stage, holding a piece of paper. His voice was clear and bright. "My family is not just made of people who look like me. It is made of people who love me. My dad teaches me how to be brave, and Amara teaches me how to be kind. They make me feel safe, even when I am scared. I think family is not who you are, born to it is who stands beside you when the world feels cold." The room fell silent. Then came soft applause that grew into something warm and genuine. Ethan felt his chest tighten, pride and emotion swelling inside him. He looked at Amara, whose eyes shimmered with tears. Daniel ran to them afterward, his smile brighter than sunlight. "Did I do good?" he asked. Ethan crouched down, pulling him into a hug. "You did perfect, buddy. You made everyone see what really matters," Amara added, her voice thick with emotion. On the drive home, Daniel fell asleep in the back seat, clutching his small participation ribbon. The setting sun bathed the sky in hues of orange and pink. "He spoke like someone far older than his years," Ethan said quietly. "He spoke like someone who has learned from love," Amara replied. When they arrived home, Ethan carried Daniel to his room, tucking him in under the covers. "Good night, my brave boy," he whispered. "Good night, Dad," Daniel mumbled sleepily. Ethan stood at the doorway for a moment, watching him, before turning to find Amara waiting in the hall. "He sees the world so clearly," Ethan said. "He sees it through your kindness," she replied. They walked together toward the living room, where the fire was beginning to die down. The silver sunflower charm glinted on the mantel beside the photograph of Grace and the small key from the wooden box. Ethan reached out and turned the key in his hand. "New beginnings," he said softly. "Maybe we are still in the middle of one." Amara smiled. "Then let us see where it leads." Outside, the last traces of winter melted away completely, leaving behind a garden ready to bloom again. Inside, the house glowed with quiet light, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt whole. Spring unfolded fully across the Caldwell estate, bringing life and color back to every corner of the land. The once frozen garden now bloomed with golden sunflowers stretching toward the sky, and Daniel spent most of his afternoons among them, chasing butterflies and calling out to Amara with joy that carried through the breeze. The house that had once been silent now pulsed with rhythm, the rhythm of a home that had learned how to breathe again. One Sunday morning, Ethan stood at the kitchen window, watching Amara hang white curtains in the living room. The sunlight poured through, wrapping her in a soft glow that reminded him of warmth itself. Daniel sat at the table nearby, working on a drawing. "What are you making, buddy?" Ethan asked, pouring coffee. "A surprise," Daniel said with a grin, "but you cannot look until it is done." "All right, I promise," Ethan said with a smile. When Amara joined them, Daniel jumped up proudly, holding out the picture. "It is us," he said. On the page, 3 figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun, surrounded by a field of flowers. Above them, in bold letters, Daniel had written, "Home." Amara looked at Ethan, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "It is perfect," she whispered. "It is true," Ethan said softly. The days that followed moved with a quiet peace. Ethan had started working less, choosing instead to spend more time with Daniel and Amara. They cooked together, played music in the evenings, and often ended the nights sitting on the porch, watching the stars bloom across the sky. One evening, as the golden light of sunset spilled across the yard, Daniel sat on the steps with a jar in his hands. Inside it glowed a faint light. "Fireflies," he said proudly. "They are like tiny stars you can hold." Amara smiled. "You should let them go soon. They belong to the night." "Just one more minute," Daniel said, staring at the flickering light. Ethan sat beside him. "You know, they remind me of something," he said. "Of what?" Daniel asked. "Of people," Ethan replied. "Sometimes we meet someone, and they light up our world for a while. And even when they are gone, their light stays inside us." Daniel thought for a moment. "Like Mom?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, like Mom." Amara's voice was gentle, "And like anyone who teaches us how to love." Daniel opened the jar then, letting the tiny lights drift into the air. They rose slowly, scattering into the twilight like floating stars. "Goodbye, little lights," Daniel whispered. Amara placed a hand on his shoulder. "They will come back when the night needs them." The following week, Ethan received a call from a community center in town. They were looking for volunteers to help with a mentorship program for children who had lost parents. He mentioned it to Amara later that evening. "They said they need someone to help organize," he explained. "It sounds like something meaningful." "You should do it," she said. "You would be good at it." "Only if you help," he replied with a small smile. "You have a gift for making people feel safe." "Then we will help together," she said. And they did. Over the next few months, the 3 of them began visiting the center, spending time with the children reading stories, planting flowers in the courtyard, teaching them to draw and paint. Daniel loved it most of all. "It is like having a big family," he said one afternoon, covered in dirt from planting sunflowers. "You were right, Amara. Kindness grows." Amara laughed softly. "It always does." Ethan watched them, pride swelling in his chest. The man who had once lived for business meetings and empty success now found fulfillment in laughter, in giving, in love that asked for nothing back. As summer drew near, the house filled with even more light. On a warm June evening, Ethan sat on the porch with Amara, while Daniel played in the yard. "Do you ever think about how far we have come?" Ethan asked. "Every day," Amara said. "When I first came here, I thought I was just taking a job. I did not know I was walking into a family." "You saved us," he said simply. "You saved each other," she replied. Daniel ran up then, holding a handful of sunflower petals. "I made a wish," he said. "Do you want to hear it?" "Of course," Amara said. Daniel looked at them both and smiled. "I wish that this never ends." Ethan glanced at Amara. "Then we will have to keep making that wish come true." "We will," she said softly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the garden glowed with the soft light of fireflies again. Daniel ran among them, his laughter echoing into the dusk. Ethan reached for Amara's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, like something that had always been meant to fit. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked quietly. "I believe in moments," she said, "and in people brave enough to choose love when they find it." He smiled. "Then I choose this moment. I choose us." The breeze carried the scent of flowers, the sound of Daniel's laughter, and the distant hum of the world at peace. In that instant, time itself seemed to stand still, holding the beauty of everything they had built. The house that once echoed with silence now sang with life. The boy who once feared the dark now chased the stars, and the man who once measured worth in wealth now understood that love was the only true treasure. The Caldwell home stood quietly beneath the night sky, its windows glowing with warmth, a symbol of everything that could be rebuilt with patience, kindness, and faith. Inside, 3 hearts beat in harmony, each one a light that would never fade. And so the story of a billionaire, his son, and the woman who taught them to love again became not a story of loss, but one of redemption, a story of finding home where love chooses to stay.